For my torn from the headlines assignment, my presentation will focus on the world food price crisis of 2007 and 2008, which is also known as simply the world food crisis. My article was published within the New York Times newspaper, specifically within the opinion pages, as an editorial. The article was published on 10 April 2008, and subsequent to its publishing, a total of 144 readers have commented on the article. A version of the online editorial I have used for the assignment did appear on page 826 of the national edition with the headline, "The World Food Crisis." I thought I would take a moment to discuss my motivation for selecting an article published in the New York Times newspaper, recalling Dr. Baker's podcast was also based on an article published in the New York Times. In listening to Dr. Baker's podcast, I realized I know nothing about the New York Times newspaper, which prompted me to select an article published in the newspaper as an opportunity to learn something about the newspaper. What I have learned about the New York Times is that it's a daily newspaper based in New York City, which has been published continuously since 1851. According to the New York Times corporate website, the newspaper enjoys a total circulation of approximately 2.2 million readers Monday through Friday, and approximately 2.6 million readers for Sunday. The New York Times is one of the most read newspapers in the U.S. alongside the Wall Street Journal. In conducting some research about the New York Times, I have come to learn the newspaper is a public traded entity, and one of the wealthiest men in the world, the Mexican billionaire Mr. Carlos Slim, has become the New York Times' largest shareholder. The graph above was prepared by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, which also I will refer to as FAO. The Food Price Index, according to FAO, is a measure of the monthly change in international prices of a basket of food commodities, consisting of the average of 5 commodity group prices weighted with the average export shares of each of the groups for the months of April 2007 through April 2008. The commodity groups include dairy, oils and fats, sugar, and of course our primary interest, cereals, which is captured by a green line. The author of the article has asserted the food price crisis was in part attributed to rising energy costs, specifically petroleum, an increased global demand for animal protein coming from the BRICS countries, those being Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, requiring heightened amounts of grain, and then additionally a diversion from the production of food crops for food towards the production of crops for biofuels. This slide details the four dominant cereals briefly mentioned in my previous slide, whereby I have introduced FAO's Food Price Index. As can be seen in the slide, prices for wheat, soya, rice, and corn have soared during the period 2005 through 2007. The above graph details the increase in price of Brent oil or Brent crude, which is a trading classification used as a benchmark to price a substantive amount of the world's internationally traded oil. Another, perhaps better known trading classification is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. Nonetheless, what I would like to focus on is the price of oil, which is indicated by a red line in the graph, noting how the price of oil has soared during the period of 2005 through 2008. And the price of food, which is indicated by a blue line, following the same price spike as oil. I have included this slide to help visualize the increased demand for meat consumption over the past decades, recalling that the author of the article has cited one of the causes for the food price crisis was an increased global demand for animal protein requiring heightened amounts of grain. I have included this slide and reference to the economist John Shaw to clarify the comment of the author of the article regarding his reference to government subsidies to farmers to divert production from growing cereals used for food to the production of corn used to produce ethanol. While a 25% increase may not seem significant when compared to a single US dollar, however, for developing countries with very limited foreign currency reserves and a requirement to import food for consumption for their citizens, a 25% increase is not sustainable. As mentioned in my previous slide, a 25% increase in food imports is not sustainable for many developing countries, which may, as cited above, result in social unrest and possibly a civil war. The author has also highlighted another element of the world food crisis related to cereal stock levels. However, while higher cereal stock levels would not have prevented the crisis, higher cereal stock levels may have delayed the initial price spike. The author of the article advocated abolishing the subsidies paid to U.S. farmers to grow biofuels, citing biofuels contribute only marginally to the reduction of greenhouse gases. Conversely, The shift in food production away from crops for food elevated global food prices, contributing to millions of people in developing countries potentially requiring aid to avoid malnutrition, arguably negating the presumed benefits gained from using biofuels. How is the world food crisis connected to our class? Well, how can we as communicators effectively communicate multifaceted environmental issues to varied stakeholders, all of which hold differing perspectives of the same issue? A topic for discussion. An increased demand for animal protein among emerging BRICS countries requires heightened quantities of grain, which in turn offers employment and revenue to suppliers. How can we effectively communicate the trade-off between potential employment and revenue for U.S. farmers and related businesses, in addition to increased taxes for the U.S. government, versus the long-term environmental consequences impacting climate change? According to the author, corn ethanol delivers only a small reduction in greenhouse gases compared with gasoline. Conversely, the Environmental Protection Agency states the largest sources of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions include passenger cars and light-duty trucks, including sport utility vehicles, pickup trucks, and minivans. These sources account for over half of the emissions from the sector, estimated at 27% of total emissions. How do we overcome these differences in communication, recalling the number of readers of the New York Times? Here I have added a few additional questions, although I honestly don't expect all of them to be answered. The intention of adding these additional questions is to convey at times the difficulty or the challenges in communicating the same issue but from different perspectives. The example that the author has outlined in the text reveals the U.S. government was subsidizing biofuels produced in the U.S. While concurrently administering a tariff of 54 cents a gallon on imported biofuels. So as a government communications officer, how might you communicate the above scenario truthfully to U.S. citizens? Whereas in a different role, perhaps as an environmental activist, how might you present or communicate the above scenario truthfully to U.S. citizens?